Chris was 14 when he was shown several short stories from his childhood. 3 of them had really happened. The 4th seemed completely ordinary. When Chris was about 5, he went to a shopping mall with his mother and older brother, got distracted, lost sight of them, and wandered between the stores on his own for a while. Nothing supernatural, no disaster, just a frightened child who could not find his family. The story said Chris began to cry until an older man noticed him and helped him get back to his relatives. At first, Chris honestly said he barely remembered any of it, but he was asked not to rush, to picture the day again, and to write down whatever came to mind. After a while, the story began to gather details. Chris remembered that the man was elderly, wore glasses, and had on a blue flannel shirt. He remembered his own fear, the moment he realized his family was no longer there, and even his mother scolding him afterward. A short paragraph gradually became a real episode from the past. It had faces, clothing, emotions, and a sequence of events. Except none of it had ever happened. Chris's mother and older brother confirmed that he had never been lost in that mall. The elderly man with glasses did not exist. The blue shirt, the fear, and the conversation with his mother appeared only after Chris had read the invented story. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Where did those details come from if no one had given them to him? Why did he not simply agree with the story, but begin to see his own past inside it? And if an invented event can feel almost as natural as a real one, what can you actually rely on when you try to verify your own memory? Near the end, we will return to Chris. The researchers told him that one of the stories had been made up and asked him to guess which one. His answer may have been the most important part of the entire case. Elizabeth Loftus's experiments are often mentioned whenever people talk about the unreliability of memory. By then, psychologists already knew that a memory could be altered even after the event was over. People were shown footage of a car accident and then asked questions about it. If the question said the cars had contacted each other, participants estimated one speed. If the cars had smashed into each other, the estimates rose. Some people later reported details that had never appeared in the footage at all. A single word introduced after the event could slightly change what a person believed they had seen. But that was still a distortion of a real memory. Loftus and her colleagues were interested in a harder question. Could someone be led to accept an entire event that had never happened as part of their own personal experience? Chris's story became one of the best-known examples, and a larger study followed with 24 participants. The researchers contacted family members in advance and asked them to provide several real stories from early childhood, that blurry period adults usually remember only in fragments. The events were deliberately ordinary: a family outing, a holiday, something that happened at home or in a store. No severe trauma, and nothing likely to cause serious distress. Then, one invented story was added to the 3 real ones. In it, the participant had supposedly become lost in a mall or a large department store, grown frightened, started crying, and then been found by an older person who helped reunite them with their family. The false story was not built entirely from nothing. It included a real mall or store the family might actually have visited. It mentioned a relative who was often around. The point was not to make the story sensational. The point was to make it plausible. That matters. No one was told they had met aliens or escaped from a secret laboratory. They were given an event that easily could have happened and fit neatly into an ordinary childhood. The participants read all 4 stories and wrote down whatever they could remember. If nothing came back, they could simply write, "I don't remember this." Later, the researchers interviewed them again and asked them to return to the events and search for more detail. Most participants never accepted the false story. Popular retellings often leave that part out. The experiment did not show that you can tell someone one lie and watch them immediately add it to their biography. But a few people did begin reporting memories, or at least fragments of memories. Some of the details did not come from the original story at all. Participants added emotions, clothing, conversations, the layout of stores, and the reactions of family members on their own. The researchers supplied only a few anchor points. The brain filled in the rest without being asked. And that is much more interesting than simple agreement. A person could have said, "My parents probably remember it better than I do, so I guess it happened." That would not require a false memory. But some participants began describing the scene as though they were slowly finding it inside their own minds. It started to feel familiar. There was a sense that the event had been there somewhere all along. Not necessarily vivid, not necessarily certain, but convincing enough to keep searching for more. To understand how that can happen, we have to stop treating memory like a video recording. There is no room in your head filled with neatly labeled tapes, each day of your life preserved exactly as it was. A memory is rebuilt every time you return to it. The brain takes what remains, a face, a smell, a fragment of conversation, the feeling of a place. It adds what it knows about how situations like that usually unfold. It pulls in family stories, old photographs, and anything you learned later. What you get is a reconstruction. Sometimes it is remarkably accurate, sometimes it is not. Imagine trying to rebuild a room from 3 old photographs. One shows the door, another catches part of a window, the third shows the edge of a table. You cannot see the whole room, but you can still picture what it probably looked like. The problem begins when the brain fills the empty spaces not with what was actually there, but with whatever best fits the overall picture. It does not behave like a strict librarian who rejects a book because the catalog number is wrong. It is closer to a tired detective. If a few pieces of evidence do not quite line up, it adjusts them to fit the most convenient explanation, closes the case, and sincerely believes the mystery has been solved. Most of the time, that ability is useful. We do not need memory to be a pile of disconnected smells, colors, and scraps of sound. We need a story that tells us what happened and what it means now. But in exchange for coherence, the brain sometimes gives up precision. There is another problem. Memory has to preserve not only information, but where that information came from. Psychologists call this source monitoring. Did I really see this? Did someone tell me about it? Did I picture the scene while trying to remember? Was it a dream? Did I see a photograph, or was I actually there? When an event is recent, the differences are usually easier to detect. Years later, they can blur. The content remains, while its origin becomes less certain. Suppose a child really did lose sight of their mother for a few seconds. In another store, an elderly man spoke to them. In an old photograph, their mother is standing near a shop window. Every fragment is real. They just belong to different days. Give someone a believable story, and the brain has a chance to combine those fragments into one new episode. It does not have to invent everything from scratch. It only has to rearrange a few pieces and fill the gaps. The source of the story mattered too. Participants were told that the information had come from a family member. That is very different from hearing a stranger in a lab make something up. A relative really does know a great deal about your early childhood. They remember years that survive in your own mind only as scattered flashes. So the first reaction may not be, "I remember this." It may be something more cautious. Maybe it really happened and I just forgot. Then the search begins. The person pictures them all, their childhood face, the fear, and their mother looking for them between the aisles. At some point, it becomes hard to tell where recovering the past ends and constructing a suitable scene begins. Most people still do not form a false memory, but for some, a trusted source, a believable story, and repeated attempts to remember are enough. If real experiments like this interest you, experiments that make familiar explanations feel less secure, subscribe to TimelessRift. This is where we look at stories with powerful implications without turning a clean headline into a final scientific verdict. Now try to recall a family story your relatives have repeated for years. A trip, a holiday, a failed joke, or something funny you supposedly said as a child. The scene may feel completely familiar. You can almost see the room, the faces, and where everyone was standing. But it is possible that what you remember is not the event itself. It is the story you have heard dozens of times. Sometimes it begins with a photograph. The image captures 1 second, and the family gradually adds everything around it. Who was behind the camera? Why everyone was laughing? What happened immediately afterward? Over time, a still image acquires movement and sound. Eventually, it becomes difficult to tell which part of the scene was truly yours. That does not mean your childhood was invented or that memory is useless. It would be absurd to take one small study and conclude that nothing can ever be trusted. But memory is far less independent than we would like it to be. Two people can describe the same family argument in completely different ways and both be sincere. Not necessarily because one of them is lying. Each person has returned to that day many times, discussed it, defended their own actions, listened to someone else's version, and fitted the event back into their own life story. The memory changed along with the person. Is there an episode from your childhood that your relatives describe very differently? In that situation, who would you trust more? The inner feeling that says, "I know I remember this," or several people insisting it happened another way? Tell me in the comments. There genuinely is no simple answer. At home, this kind of error may end in an argument around the dinner table. In court, the consequences are much more serious. An eyewitness can be honest. They can sincerely want to help, describe a face, clothing, and a sequence of events in detail, and sound completely convincing. But confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. After an incident, a person talks to police, hears other witnesses, watches the news, and answers repeated questions. Every new detail has a chance to mix with what they actually saw. After enough time, memory may no longer keep a label attached to every fragment. It remembers the content, but can lose track of the source. And that is one of the most unsettling features of a false memory. It does not feel like a lie. When someone deliberately lies, they know there is another version of events. With a false memory, there may be no conflict inside them at all. They are telling you what they genuinely believe is their own past. This is also where we need to lower the temperature a little. Online, the Lost in the Mall experiment is often described too confidently, as if researchers effortlessly implanted an entirely fictional childhood into one person out of every 4. The reality is more careful than that. The original sample was small. Some participants did not report a vivid memory. They reported a single image, a vague feeling, or simply accepted that the event might have happened. Treating all of those as the same thing is not entirely fair. Later studies repeated similar procedures with larger groups. In one registered replication, 123 people took part. The authors classified a substantial number of responses as false memories or false beliefs. Other researchers later reviewed the interviews using stricter criteria. They separated people who actually described an experience from those who merely accepted that they might once have been lost. Under that approach, the number fell considerably. At first, it looks as though one side simply counted the results incorrectly. But the dispute goes deeper. Researchers do not always define a false memory in exactly the same way. Is one invented image enough? Does the person need to feel as though they are back inside the event? Do they have to be completely certain? And if the scene is made from real fragments, but the event itself never happened, where should it be placed? There is no perfectly clean line yet. So the honest conclusion is calmer than the popular headline. Under certain conditions, some people can begin to believe in a personal event that never happened, add details to it, and partially experience it as their own memory. But that does not mean every disputed memory is invented. It does not justify automatically dismissing reports of traumatic events. And there is still no reliable brain scan that can take one complex personal memory and stamp it true or false. That would be convenient. But memory was never designed for the convenience of detectives, judges, or family arguments. Its job is to help a person use the past to act in the present. For that purpose, a coherent version of events may be more useful than a flawless copy of every detail. And now let us return to Chris. After he had described them all, the elderly man, the glasses, the blue shirt, and his own fear several times, he was told that one of the 4 stories had been completely invented. He was asked to identify which one. Chris did not choose them all. At first, he pointed to one of the real events, and when the researcher explained that the false story was the one about getting lost, Chris had trouble accepting it. By then, the episode no longer felt like someone else's paragraph. It had shape, mood, and sequence. It had taken a place beside real memories and no longer stood out clearly from them. That is what makes this experiment genuinely unsettling. Not the fact that memory sometimes makes mistakes. We already know people forget dates, faces, and details. What matters is how naturally an invented scene can settle into the past and begin to feel like it belongs there. We use memory to explain our own character. We say, "I am afraid of this because that happened to me. I act this way because I went through something as a child." The past becomes part of the foundation of the self. But that past is not stored inside us untouched. Every time we remember it, we reach into it again and change it a little. Perhaps memory was never an exact recording of life. It may be closer to a working version of the past, built to help us function today. And if making that version coherent means filling a few gaps with the most suitable details, the brain does not always see a problem. In the next episode, we will go even further. A person is shown an image and confidently says they saw nothing. Then their left hand selects the correct object without hesitation. Who saw the image? Who made the decision? And why does the person have no idea where the answer came from? One brain, 2 decisions, and an experiment that makes the word "I" sound far less simple.